Hi, everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of Strata's Orchestration Kitchen. Today's episode is a fun one. This is going to be kind of a meaty topic for us because I know a lot of companies are really interested in resilience and continuity. And so today's topic is one around maintaining critical application access when your IDP goes down. As always, I'm joined today by Chef Terry Cozard, who leads our solutions engineering team at Strata. And I'm your host, Chef Callahan, on the product marketing team here at Strata. Chef Cozard, as we look to what we're going to discuss today, let's take a quick thought about the agenda here. So, as we do with every episode of the Orchestration Kitchen, we lead off with just a quick reminder, refresher course, if you will, on what identity orchestration is. That helps us set sort of the groundwork and the foundation for the approach that we'll be discussing as we cook in the kitchen. Next, we're going to go through a recipe whiteboard. So think of this as really kind of the recipe card as you're thinking about the ingredients and what you'll be seeing as we actually demo live. And as I talk about demoing live, that's what we're actually going to be doing then with the recipe itself. We will actually cook this recipe live. And as always, we'd invite the audience to please ask questions throughout. There's a Q&A button down the bottom right that you can use. So please be sure to add questions. We will address those throughout. And so without further ado, Chef Terry, I'm excited to have you join me again. And as we dig into the idea of what to do when your IDP is offline.
Absolutely. This is one of the more exciting things that I have the opportunity to talk with people about, because the sad reality of it is as we've all moved to the cloud, and cloud infrastructure is fantastic in so many ways, but one of the challenges that can come with it is those rainy day scenarios. If you lose your internet connectivity, if for whatever reason your identity provider is having a rainy day and they're not reachable, how do you keep people, customers, your workforce, business partners working in these critical applications? And so what identity orchestration allows us to do is give you lots of flexibility that you can either have human intervention or an automatic remediation to whatever you'd like.
Love it. Well, we talked a little bit beforehand about the ways that we enjoy cooking. And, you know, I'm a griller myself. You mentioned sous vide. I think a good baseline here is let's dig into just for a moment. What is identity orchestration? Give us kind of a snapshot of what it is that we're talking about as we speak to identity orchestration.
Absolutely. Identity orchestration really is a new and upcoming segment of the industry. We are proud to have pioneered it, but really the idea of orchestration itself is you can allow yourself the flexibility to mix and match any of the common identities services that you may be wanting to put into a user journey. Today, we're talking about if an IDP should go offline. So your things like authentication, access control, potentially MFA may be unavailable for some time period. Orchestration allows you to pivot to other technologies as it's necessary to do those things, but it doesn't just stop there. Other benefits of identity orchestration is you can swap in and out, mix and match other things like where you source information. If your IDP has most of the information about your users, but you need a little bit more, a little extra spice, if you will, we can natively go to the information wherever it naturally wants to live, be that your HR system, some directory somewhere on premise. Doesn't matter from our perspective. We make that really easy. But we can also do those things with advanced services, like some organizations want to create a centralized authorization server. So we can add that into the user journey without changing the application, without encumbering the identity provider, and extending the ecosystem of your identity ecosystem. And then in the bottom right of this diagram, we do the last millimeter integration to the application. So the application in almost all cases doesn't even know the world around it changed. It used to be protected by something, and now it's protected by the identity fabric, which gives you these advanced use cases like resiliency that we're talking about today.
So you said briefly, and I don't want to bury the lead here, and I see in little text here, we talked about the fact that there's no change to the apps. You talked about the app not being the wiser, that anything has changed. We're legitimately talking about a recipe today that keeps the application as is. We're not having to remix the application, refactor, rewrite anything going on there.
Yeah, that's exactly right. In a traditional world, if you have an application that's tied to its identity provider, if that identity provider goes offline, you're out of luck. There really aren't very many solutions, because the true reality of it is that any given vendor has a difficult time keeping their systems up if their system's down. So giving an alternative, a working immediate alternative to something else, is a pretty thorny challenge. And so that's one of the prima facie use cases that we built our orchestration to solve for.
Got it. Well, sounds spicy. I'm ready. Let's go ahead and dig in. Let's take a look at the recipe workflow here as we think about what to do when your IDP goes down. Now, we're in today's example and in today's recipe, as we're going through this, we're going to be speaking to, this could happen with any cloud IDP having an issue as things go down, right? And so,
That's right.
we just happen to pick, in this case, PingOne for the scenario here, but want to point out, just as you did, that this can relate to any cloud delivered IDP.
Cloud delivered or even on premise. This really gives you the ability to resiliently fall back to whatever makes sense. What we're going to show here as examples are just that, examples. It's not the only way it can happen. It can happen a myriad of different combinations or ways, and you can have multiple tiers of falling back. But what we're going to show today is an application that's protected by Ping. Ping is a fine identity provider. It works and is generally up most of the time, as one would expect any IDaaS platform. But every vendor has a rainy day. It's just the reality of technology. It's the best laid plans even get thwarted by just bizarre things, solar flares, whatever it may be, or somebody digging up the fiber optics outside of a corporate headquarters. All of these things are just real world circumstances that just are unanticipated. But the unintended consequence of that, when the application is expected the IDP to be in the ecosystem, is that you no longer are able to do that. You can't transact business. Your administrators can't do those break glass kind of scenarios that are so critical. And so resiliency gives you the ability to automatically detect that there's a problem and fall back to whatever makes sense, that we can always guarantee that you get your customers into your sites, your administrators into wherever they need to be, and business partners, whatever the critical needs are within your organization.
So important, because as we think about it, you just talked about, 5 or 6 different ways, things that happen. But if I were to summarize those, if your IDP is unavailable, your business is shut down. Nothing is happening. And really what we're talking about is, how do we provide some form of continuity? How do we provide that backup plan as you're thinking about this? So, as you showed here, walk us through maybe, so Ping is reachable. What's going on in this workflow?
Yeah, absolutely. So in the upper left, as a user is trying to traverse to an application, this diagram is showing legacy-based applications. The same thing exists for modern applications, things that support OIDC and SAML. But the idea here is that along the user journey, when the user is trying to get to any given application, we'll defer to Ping and say, gosh, if we haven't seen you yet, we're going to ask Ping, is this indeed an authenticated, authorized user? Ping will do what it's really good at doing. It'll actually prove the user is who they say they are. It'll may or may not provide MFA or step up or passwordless authentication. And then once it does all of its job, we then allow the user into the application. So in a healthy world where Ping is reachable, the users have no idea we're here. However,
So I was going to say, walk us through a scenario. I mean, that's what we're getting at. This is kind of, we're waiting on bated breath. Ping is not available. Your cloud IDP is not available. Your IDP, as you clarified, is not available. What now?
Yeah, absolutely. This is the beauty of orchestration, is because we are a part of the user journey and the application is natively just expecting us to be available. We then can make intelligent decisions based on the fact that Ping isn't there anymore. So when Ping's there, everything is well and good. But for whatever reason, if a rainy day scenario happens, we can automatically detect that and automatically fall back to whatever makes sense for that organization. In the demonstration, we're going to fall back to an LDAP that happens to be reachable from the critical system, but it could be anything. It could be a different region of Ping. It could be a different technology entirely. You might go to some other IDP in a break glass scenario. The options are limitless, but the idea here is that as the user gets to the application, the orchestrator has the intelligence to know all those things and says, I know that I can't get to Ping, so I'm not going to bother sending somebody there. This time, I'm going to have the orchestrator flash up a login prompt, and then we're going to validate that versus a LDAP directory that's nearby.
Well, this sounds great. And one thing I wanted to point out here, as we talk about, the things going offline, whether it's your IDP, for the different reasons that it does, we kind of get the namesayer. We keep talking about that rainy day scenario, but this could also be a planned outage, right? This could be something where geographically, or somebody's out to sea, cruise ship. It could be a lot of things where it could also be a planned outage. What we're doing here is just de facto redundancy. We're talking about some way to fail over when the IDP is not available.
That's exactly right, because every organization has a disaster recovery plan. As you mentioned, cruise lines are a great example of that. There's just parts of the world that they're just not going to have internet connection, but they're also floating data centers, so they have to get access to the things that are important. Brick and mortar businesses aren't quite as mobile, but they still have those same patterns that will exist during rainy day scenarios. So there's lots of applicability to this. It just depends on what's the best need for your organization. But the good news is that historically in my career, this hasn't been an easily solvable problem. There's all kinds of different ways to ameliorate or make that window of availability small should a bad scenario happen. But now with orchestration, it's instantaneous.
That's awesome. Well, we've seen the kind of whiteboard here. We've seen the recipe flow, what we're thinking about. I think we're ready to just jump into the kitchen and show how we would set this up and how it actually is going to support things. So as you're getting into that, one thing you and I were talking about beforehand is you actually just came back from a trade show. And I know that, probably if you and I were at an identity event, say 2 years ago, resilience and redundancy certainly of interest, but maybe not in every single conversation. You mentioned that nearly every conversation you had last week involved some form of identity resilience.
Absolutely. It really is the top of mind of a lot of major complex organizations. And 2 years ago, as you'd mentioned, I, as a professional, and everybody that we talked to as professionals, they were talking about, gosh, under those kind of catastrophic circumstances, what's the smallest window that I can have my business be offline? And so they would create very rich plans on disaster recovery. How can I get that window as small as possible so that I can not be down days, but maybe a few hours to maybe however long they could shrink that based on their business processes. Well, now fast forward to this advent of identity orchestration, and now it's instantaneous. Those applications that are important to you from a revenue perspective, from an intellectual property perspective, from whatever the keys to your kingdom are, we can keep you accessing them regardless of what's going on in the organization.
Awesome. Well, I'm drooling. I'm sure our audience as well. Let's get going. We're all hungry to see a little bit of demo action here.
Fantastic. Let's get this working. So right now I'm going to demonstrate the healthy condition. Obviously, in a healthy condition, we're trying to get to an application, and we're going to ping, as we should. And voila, we're into the application. Really nothing very exciting or anticipating. It's a wonderful recipe because ping's up and healthy and life continues as it should. But now what I'm going to do is I'm going to emulate what happens if ping goes down. It would be bad practice for me to try to actually take ping down. And it would also be a pretty boring demo if I turned off my internet connection. So what I'm going to do now is I'm actually just going to edit my host file, and I'm just going to make sure that I tell my computer that I can't get to PingOne anymore.
I appreciate that, and I'm sure our audience does too, because as any good cooking show, we want to show all the things that we're doing as we do this. So no smoke and mirrors here. We're actually showing exactly how we're taking this offline and making it unavailable. So offline, unavailable.
All right. So now we're going to go to that exact same application that we started with, and this time the orchestrator is putting up a login screen. Now, I understand this is not the best user experience. This is an example of what's possible. This is just a simple HTML script that you get to determine the look and feel of. Should this be the pattern? And again, keep in mind the fallback pattern could be a different region for Ping. It could be Azure. It could be a different technology entirely. So all of the things are within your reach. So now I can go in and log in here using those exact same credentials that I did earlier, and I'm back into the same application. Absolutely nothing about the application's changed. In fact, the application has no idea Ping isn't there anymore. And it can be that simple and that elementary for every organization.
I love it. You and I both have talked to both, current customers and future customers of ours, and you talked about that idea of minimizing that window of downtime. It was okay. How can we get it from a few hours down to maybe 15 minutes? But as we talk to our customers and other organizations, 15 minutes can be millions of dollars depending on what's at stake here. And so it's just not a tenable situation. So what you just showed is literally an automatic failover scenario as things became unavailable and a forced unavailability.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And the reverse is also true, Mark, that it's wonderful to detect a problem and then to fall back to whatever's there. But what happens when PingOne comes back online? And now I want to fall forward into my healthy pattern. We do that automatically as well. And there's lots of richness on how we can make those decisions. I'm doing it fairly simplistically for our kitchen today, but we can do it based on all kinds of different parameters that show us that things just aren't behaving the way that you would ideally like them to see.
That's perfect. Well, and totally valid question just came up from Lindsay, and she just said, you've shown us that you protect us from, PingOne going down, but what happens if Strata goes down? That seems like a fair question here.
Very fair question, and it's one of those that we get every day, and we should get it every day. If I'm coming in and telling people about, gosh, we can insulate you from those rainy day scenarios from your IDP, how do I insulate you from rainy day scenarios with Strata? So architecturally, Strata is different by design. We are a distributed architecture, which gives you the ability to behave very differently than an IDaaS platform or really any SaaS delivered anything. If a SaaS delivered service is down, it's down. There's not much you can do until they get their ducks in a row. But we're a deploy anywhere distributed architecture. And by design, each one of the little orchestrators that are doing these decisions isn't intended to be precious. If it stops working, turn it off and then just spin up another one. If you're doing that by hand, it'll take a couple of seconds, 10 tops. If you're doing it in an automated fashion and you've got things within your ecosystem to determine when things are unhealthy, it automatically will fail over that if any given orchestrator just stops behaving, it just spins up another one. Similarly, we also can change based on the need. When you're dealing with critical applications, you may have a typical concurrency rate of whatever it may be. And then during peak periods, there may be significantly more. Again, because of our unique architecture, you can spin them up trivially to get whatever load that you may need through the environment. So we insulate you from even rainy day scenarios of our platform should those come around.
Well, and I think what's important to point out there is, we talked about two organizations there, Ping being offline, or if Strata was offline. In that sort of flow diagram, as we talked about identity orchestration at the beginning, we talked about other services as well. I know the topic of today's conversation was around what happens when your IDP for authentication is offline, but could the same hold then true for if an MFA provider is offline or some other service is unavailable on that?
You bet. For all of the different identity related systems, if any one of them are unavailable or you lack trust in it or it gets hacked or any of those kind of disaster kind of scenarios, we can pivot to others. The other benefits of orchestration is you can have multiples of all of them. You can have multiple IDPs for any given application. You can have multiple MFAs types for different applications because we're masters at context switching. Based on these circumstances, we go this direction, that circumstance, we go somewhere else.
Gotcha. And it's funny you just mentioned multiples, because I think Carl was just listening to that and asked about, isn't the elephant in the room the fact that if you're talking about multiples, you're talking about 2x the cost of maintaining a second IDP?
You bet. Potentially, not likely. In our experience, there's always going to be a fallback. So if you think about PingOne, who we're showing by example here today, it gets its information about the users from typically Active Directory. Could be others, but I'd say the vast majority of those exist in Active Directory, scattered throughout different organizations today. So if that's the pattern and you want to fall back to something that's natively available should your internet connection goes down, AD may be a good candidate for that. So it doesn't have to double extra cost at all. So all of those are really decisions that the organization makes. All we do is allow you to take those things that are probably already a part of your architecture, already designed for these high availability scenarios, and you can just fully leverage those wherever you need.
That makes sense. And also, does it not also stand true that maybe you don't want 100% of your applications and 100% of your users to be failing over? You may have a small subset of critical applications that you want failing over to a second IDP, and a small subset of privileged critical users to fall over. And so, as you think about pricing of other IDPs, of course, there's the roll your own scenario, but oftentimes they're user based. And so, if it's a small subset, once again, we're showing that it doesn't have to be a 2x scenario, to be sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that I talk to people a lot about identity orchestration is that it's almost analogous to you having a magic wand. Those problems that didn't used to be solvable 2 years ago, 2 decades ago, are now within reach. But the opportunity there is that you get to determine what that looks like. So if you want there to be a resiliency for just your administrative staff so they can do the core business functions that are important during these kind of rainy day scenarios, it's a slow Tuesday. We can do that easily. If you only, I talked to somebody at the conference just yesterday, as a matter of fact, all they really cared about is having their executives get access to the things that are most important under those stark circumstances. That's another great scenario as well. The idea that we have, though, is that we're not in the business to tell them how to do business. They can have that magic wand, determine, yes, I want this subset, or I want everyone to get access to it, because now it's just a declarative policy-driven change. Let me show you, use that as a segue to actually show you how this all works.
Love it.
So let me go into my...
When you talked about, as you're bringing this up, you talked about it's a business's decision about how they want to do this. I was trying to think about the other day, as I was talking with my wife a little bit, about the idea of identity resilience and identity redundancy. And, what came to mind was this idea of like, okay, when I'm driving my car, I have a spare tire in the trunk. If I get a flat tire, I have the ability to slowly pull off the highway, take the exit ramp, slow down my speed, get in the trunk, swap the tire, put it back on, get back on the highway, and head off again. In an airplane, you don't have that ability. As you think about this, there's a reason airplanes have thrice redundant electrical and hydraulic systems. There's a reason that they have multiple engines that they can fly with just a single engine if an engine fails out. And so I think what we're really thinking about here is, how is this, as you think about your business, are you driving a car or are you flying an airplane?
That's exactly right. And for any given application, you may have both. There may be some times where some things are better transported through car, and so you have the ability to endure a flat tire and outages that may come with that analogy, and then others that are just the business stops. There's significant financial penalties. I've talked with other organizations that they provide 5 nines of availability to the business, and that's what they have to maintain, but they only get 3 nines from their identity provider. So they have to figure out, how do you rationalize that? Orchestration can help.
Love it. Well, orchestration, let's take a look at what you're going to show us here.
Fantastic. So this is actually how you build the configuration policies for resiliency and any other patterns that we can show for you. There's 3 simple steps, and I'll show you exactly the steps that we did today. The first is the identity fabric elements. This is where I integrated Ping and the LDAP integration. So here, just showing you what that looks like. In Ping's view, we're another application. It's very easy to exchange this information. Your admins know exactly how to do it today. It's metadata exchange. And then similarly for the LDAP, it's the same kind of things. Where do I find the LDAP server? How do I log into it, and things like that? Then the application is the step 2. You can protect any modern application or legacy. For a demonstration, I used a legacy application called Canary Bank, but we also can do the same thing for modern applications, those that understand modern protocols. And so then you just tell us, how does the application expect to be protected? For legacy applications, will generally be a proxy, nearly always. But again, if you were talking about a modern application, it's again another metadata exchange. And then you create the user flow. This is where you start determining, under what circumstances do I go to Ping, and under what circumstances do I go to LDAP. So we can do that in a wide variety of ways. Again, you get the magic wand to determine under what conditions do we make that change. I used a very simplistic example. It's there or it's not. You may want a much more nuanced decision process. All of that gets determined through the user flow. And then you just deploy it out into your environment. I'd mentioned that we're not a SaaS service. This UI is actually just where you build your configurations. But the actual execution branch, the orchestration fabric, is nothing but a running instance of our orchestrator, Mavericks, and then the configuration file that gets generated from here. If you have those two things, you can run it on a submarine.
That's fun. I love the idea. Submarine, a rocket ship. I mean, it really can be that isolated as you do this. And the setup that you just walked us through here in the UI, that was for the backup IDP. Could be 3 IDPs that get backed up, but this is also the same process you would do for your services as well, right? So MFA or authorization service as failover scenarios.
Exactly right. Yeah, it all just goes into the user flow. Under what conditions do we do the healthy pattern, the secondary pattern? If you want a tertiary pattern, perfect. All declared here.
Once again, we're flying that airplane. There's a reason you have thrice redundant systems. We have trust that the plane will stay aflight, and that's important. One question that I did miss, just and it piggybacks off of Carl's, is Matt was asking about the fact if we've heard any interest in a standalone standby failover SSO/MFA offering. Would that be of interest? And I think what Matt is saying is it would be of interest to him. And are we hearing that elsewhere of sort of a standby service? And I think that is indeed the case. It'd be very interesting to think about that from an all-in-one solution. Probably a little bit prescient, something we should look into a little bit more, but certainly something we've heard from other customers.
Absolutely. Great question. Thank you for asking.
Well, speaking of those questions, we don't get to answer everything in our live orchestration kitchens, but what we do have is the ability for them to connect with you afterward. Is that right, Chef Terry?
Absolutely. I would welcome any interaction or questions that you might have. Similarly, don't trust me. Test it for yourself. If you want to start cooking and getting your hands on some of these delicious recipes, you don't need my permission. You don't need my intervention. I'm always happy to answer questions, but feel free to go to mavericks.strata.io and you can sign up for a trial yourself. That'll take you through the most common patterns. If you have a more exotic pattern or just one of those applications that are harder to reach, give us a call. We've seen it. Similarly, if you want one-on-one session with me, you can reach me at Terry, Terry, at strata.io. Be more than happy to answer any questions you might have.
Hopefully you'll be wearing a chef smock as you take those one-on-ones as well.
I wear it every day, Mark.
I love it. Well, as we think about these episodes, obviously this brings us to the close of today's episodes as we think about how to keep your business afloat as your IDP goes down. But we've had a lot of other sort of spicy challenges that we've solved together. And so I invite our audience to go to the Orchestration Kitchen Hub, where you can find on-demand replays of all the previous episodes, as well as what's coming next as Chef Terry and I dig into our next tasty meals together. With that, I want to thank you, Chef Terry, for joining us and walking us through everything today. It was a pleasure as always. And also to thank our audience. I know it's a valuable use of 30 minutes of your time. Hopefully you found this as valuable to you as we hope it was. And we look forward to having you on our next episode. With that, we'd like to tell everyone, look forward to seeing you next time. Take care.